morning. We're going to start. This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 190-152, 190-153, 190-154, and resolution number 190-164. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolutions.
Bill number 190152, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2020 through 2025 inclusive. Bill number 190153, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2020 capital budget. Bill number 190154, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2020. Resolution number 190164, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2020 through 2024 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2019, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal year 2020, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2020 through fiscal 2025. Today we will hear testimony from the following city departments: Finance Department, City Treasurer, Sinking Fund Commission, Board of Pension and Retirement. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify from the administration is?
Rob Dubow.
Good morning.
Good morning, Council President.
Drum roll.
Members of Council, my name is Rob Dubow. I'm here to testify on the Department of Finance's FY20 proposed operating budget. With me is the first Deputy Finance Director, Kat Lamb. The overall budget amount is $1.8 billion, $15.8 million of which is for the Office of Director of Finance direct expenditures. You have a written copy of my testimony, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Good. Man, I am so impressed. I got a couple of quick questions. As you know, last year, the school district returned to city, or more formally known as local control, following the implementation of a new local school board. Given this new shift in control, our credit rating agencies have listed the school district financial solvency as a potential risk to the city's credit rating. So do you think credit rating agencies will view the newer relationship between the city and school district over the long run, given Philadelphia's new local control of the school district, in addition to their continued need for additional school funding? I think in the earlier testimony there was a question about the city's $5 billion budget, and we had raised some concerns about that, but in large part that's because of our continued increase in contributions to the school district. And second part of that question, does it make any sense to combine the borrowing power of the city and the school district? So if you give me the first one.
So for the first part, I think what the credit agencies want to take a step back. The credit agencies understand the importance of having a fiscally stable school district that's providing the outcomes that we all want. So I think what they would want to see is that happening within the context of our maintaining our fund balances and our solid fiscal condition. I think that's really what they would want to see. I think it's important for them, though, that the borrowing for each entity stays separate. I think that's when they would really start to get concerned if we tried to combine the borrowing capacity of the two.
Okay. And we talk about the borrowing power again.
So I think that would raise some concerns for the rating agencies if we tried to combine the two credits.
All right, I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. All right. Let's talk about our infamous Federal Reserve. So our 5-year plan includes a significant reserve projection over the life of the plan, including $92 million for the rainy day fund, $286 million for federal cuts, and an ending general fund balance in FY24 of over $153 million. things that I guess we should be, as the fiscal control people here, we should be a little excited. But if the city's projected expenditures and revenue are in line with the 5-year plan, the city will enter the FY24 with significant reserves at a level that will potentially exceed the city's internal fund balance reserve policy. Could you speak more to me on what you believe the appropriate allocation distribution between the federal funding reserve, the rainy day fund, and the general fund balance should be?
So I'm going to take that in two kind of separate chunks. One, to talk about the fund balance and the budget stabilization reserve fund. I think those two together should be in the 6 to 8% range to give us an appropriate cushion against if there's an economic downturn, if things go worse than we expect, we need to have a cushion. The budget stabilization reserve fund, I think, is important because there's still uncertainty about what might happen in Washington and Harrisburg. So having that kind of cushion above our target 6 to 8%, I think, is important.
What do you think is going to happen in Washington?
I think there's still a chance that there could be cuts that would have a negative impact on us. And we've seen the president within the last few months take executive action to move funds for a border wall.
But that's money that's already appropriated to other departments. That's not going to, I mean, that border wall funding was federal money.
That's right. So
for defense, it wasn't, I don't think we had any of that money allocated for the city.
No, we didn't. So that time it didn't wind up hurting us, but there's always a risk that something will happen that could hurt us.
Yeah, but I understand the risk initially when a certain party had control of all 3 branches. That's not the case now. Are we concerned that the Democrats wouldn't position themselves as a stopgap in terms of some dramatic cuts?
I think there's still a risk that there are things the president can do on his own.
What's PICA's position on that? Or what do you anticipate PICA's position to be on that?
I think PICA views that reserve fund as something positive. I think they're happy that that's there.
You think so?
Yes.
You think this year's PICA analysis will be supportive of the continuation of the Federal Reserve Fund?
I think so.
You think so? All right. So the next question, should we adopt a formal policy of moving unspent reserves into the rainy day fund?
So I think there are 2 different kind of positives. One, for fund balance, so you have a little more flexibility than you have with money that goes into the budget stabilization reserve fund.
Right.
So I don't think you'd want all of that money to fall to the budget stabilization reserve fund because then you're limiting your flexibility.
Right. Okay. Wage tax. We slowed down the reduction. Has there been any thought given our relatively healthy fund balances of looking at possibly moving that back to the earlier, I guess 2 fiscal years ago, wage tax reduction rate?
Yeah, so we have not had those conversations, and we still think that our fund balances are lower than where we want them to be, particularly in some of the out years of the plan. We get below 100 million in one of those years, so we had not really had those conversations.
But that fund balance, I mean, all due respect, I think it should include the Federal Reserve Fund. I mean, I know you like to categorize it in a different way,
right?
But that's the basis for having a $5 billion budget, as you said earlier. So that, far as from my perspective,
right,
that's a fund balance.
Even with that fund balance, we're still way below where the GFOA thinks we should be. And they say we should have 2 months worth of reserve, which would be like 16%. And we never get anywhere close to that.
Okay. And one last question this round. So in the budget, we include a $1.35 million increase to the Community College of Philadelphia. How do you think that reflects on the possibility of reaching a settlement?
I think it doesn't include the potential that a settlement would have some additional costs.
So there could, if there's a settlement reached, would it essentially be a shortfall in this,
I think we'd have to,
in the budget,
we'd have to have
or will we entertain
conversations.
some additional revenue?
We'd have to have
over
conversations
the course of
about
the-
what that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning.
Good morning.
There was a recent article about Philadelphia opening up its checkbook and making all of its expenditures known. I think it covered FY2017, but not 18. Why not? And
I'm on. So, Kat Lamb, First Deputy. It's just the process to actually make that data available is pretty laborious. So we're in the process of doing that process for fiscal 18. It was just that we had started the process with 17 data and had anticipated it would take us less time than it actually did. So that's why we started with fiscal 17, but we're in the process of releasing fiscal 18 as well.
second tier to that is under risk management and payouts. Do you have a list of departments that have made settlements on different liabilities, exposures, payments?
We can get you something that breaks that out.
Does any department in particular jump out at you?
Let's get you that information. We'll get you something in writing on how that breaks out and what departments may be higher.
So, okay, so we can't find that now? We can't, somebody back there doesn't have that?
I'd rather actually kind of make sure we get it right and give you solid information.
Okay. So, for example, the police department, do we know for different payouts by way of liability? What generally is that? Is that a larger department?
Probably, but I want to make sure I got you there.
So I'm going to keep getting that answer if I keep asking?
Yes.
Okay. So when do you think you'll be able to formulate an answer to that?
That shouldn't take long. I mean, we should be able to get that back to you relatively quickly.
Okay. By way of capital expenditures, how are we doing on bridges and the infrastructure stuff by way of above ground, not sewers, but by way of bridges that go across neighborhoods? How is that?
Hold on, that document I have with me.
All right, I'll take it. We have a significant backlog in bridges repair. I always remember the 41st Street Bridge in the 3rd District took 10 years to fix. And as we look at, most of those bridges are over 100 years old. North Philly, West Philly, South Philly, Northeast. Those bridges that we crossed on our way to New York some of them are imminently dangerous. And I wanted to know what the cooperation level was from the federal to the state to us on how we're repairing them.
Oh, how they're working together?
No, not just that. How are we doing for our responsibility? And then when it comes to CSX and others, how we're cooperating to find out a capital plan by year of what we're going to see fixed. Yeah. South Street Bridge took considerable amount of time. 41st Street Bridge took 10 years. I just want to, in my lifetime, know which ones to cross and which ones to avoid.
Right. So I can give you the dollar amounts, and then we can have streets give you kind of a schedule of what bridges are going to be done. So we have, in FY20, we show a total of $200 million for bridges, and of that, about 2.8 or so is from us, and then there's matching funds from the federal government. Yeah, and over the life of the plan, then that gets up to about $350 million total. About $14 million comes from GO-backed borrowings, and we can get you a schedule of what that looks like.
In particular, on that, timetables provided to district council members in particular as to when these bridges are going to be repaired. The one that jumps in my mind is the 59th Street Bridge in my district, which is due to, and if you have specifics on that one, that would be helpful, because the more advance notice you give us, the more we can prepare the respective communities to know about the disruption. Overbrook, Winfield, Overbrook Farms are all going to be impacted by that one bridge closure in one way or another. Diversion of traffic, disruption of buses and mass transit. So it's the kind of thing we would like to get ahead of.
Right, so we will get you information, the 59th Street Bridge, we'll get you information on time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning.
Morning.
I have a couple of questions. On the departmental summary by fund, this thick package that I read through, I have a few questions on that. I know you love that. But if you go to page 4, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this.
Yep.
Page 4 at the bottom, it says in fiscal 18, the actual obligations were 1.694 billion.
Yep.
1.694 billion. And then it shows in 2020 it's 2.3 billion. It's a 37% increase over 4 years. And I know a lot of it probably is this advances and other miscellaneous and contributions. Could you just explain those so we're clear on what that is?
Yeah, so part of that is we include contingencies for if we get grants. Sometimes it's spent and sometimes it's not, but we need to have appropriations in case grants come in.
Because that's a huge increase in 4 years.
Yeah, but it's not. So if you go to page 77,
Okay.
you can see up there in the grants revenue fund, 220 million.
Yeah.
That is a contingency for if grants come in.
So
If they don't, then that's not spent. That's not general fund money. It's not taxpayer supported
So
money.
that's not a guarantee every year. It's
It
hit
is
or
not.
miss.
That's right.
Because in 18 looks like we got 0, and in 19 looks like we got 250 million.
That's the original appropriation. The estimated obligations actually 0 in there.
Okay. And then just a quick commentary. You know, I've said that it feels like the budget went up $855 million in 4 years. How much of that was attributed to the school district?
So over 100 million is school district, and another, I think 130 is pensions. So just those two together are about 230 million.
25% of the increase.
Yeah, and then the budget stabilization reserve fund and the contingency for federal cuts is about another 100 million. And other benefits went up about another 100 million. So those items account for most of that increase.
So I think part of the concerns I have is that the budget went up $855 million, or 21% in 4 years. And to my recollection, I don't know another 4-year period in the history where we've seen that level of increase in our budget.
So I think there have probably been other periods where there have been high percentage increases. So
Not of the dollar figure of $855 million.
right, because dollars today are worth a different amount from what they were worth 20 years ago.
Right. But if we're looking out the next 4 years, we're not going to be looking at another $800 million over the next 4 years, are we?
So if you look in the 5-year plan, which I don't have with me. I can look here. So you actually, by FY2024, more like at 5.4 billion in the 5-year plan.
What would the total be in
5.4 billion roughly.
so 400 million over the next 4 years versus 855 over the last 4. And then the other concern I have, and I think we're hearing this from the residents, because I think in the last 4 years the inflation rate was like 5.25% in total. But when you look at the increase in, for example, real estate taxes across the board in the last as a total of our collections at least, we went up 21%, which is probably just over 5% a year, 5.25%. And I think people are feeling those increases. And I think in retrospect, if we had been going along at 1-2% a year instead of this big push a year or so of 10 or 11%, we wouldn't have this outcry.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, one of the things that you pointed out when you first got here is that our values were under-assessed.
Correct.
And I think we're catching up. But you're right. And that's part of the reason that working with council and council suggestion, we've put in relief programs, like the UPA program, to help people who are having trouble paying.
And do you think on the realty transfer tax that in the last 4 years you've actually collected 32% more, which has been a big increase? Do you think that's going to continue?
So we show that over the plan slowing down, not that kind of rate of increase.
Right, because there's going to be a slowdown in 2020.
Yeah, and that's built in.
Okay. Let me go to some, are we doing on time? Am I okay on time? Okay. So I want to make sure, I want to ask some questions just so I have gained knowledge on this. So I need to learn more. But I understand that there are 2 financial reports that the federal government requires from any city that receives federal funds. The Schedule of Financial Assistance, also known as CFA.
Yep.
And the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR.
Right.
On page 163 of the fiscal year CAFR, under the single audit, it says we are not...
Which fiscal year? Sorry.
Fiscal year 18.
Yeah.
Under the CAFR, under the single audit, it says we are not in compliance with the Uniform Guidance Section 200-5.12 because these financial reports haven't been submitted on time. It goes on to say that this non-compliance could affect future funding. Should we be concerned about this as a city?
So we have been working closely. It's something between us and the controller's office, and we've been working closely with them to speed up our schedule and so that we can make those deadlines. It's obviously something that we had some concern about, or we wouldn't have put it in the document, but it's a problem that we were aware of and we're addressing.
And so, but right now we're not in compliance.
We're not, but we're working towards getting in compliance.
And so what exactly is keeping us from getting into compliance? What is the issue?
I think it's essentially a workload issue, and we're trying to kind of figure out the best way to address that.
Is there anything that you need from us in appropriations for more people or whatever to get this in compliance?
I don't think so, but if we do, we will let you know.
And then why was the fiscal year C for the Schedule of Financial Assistance not submitted until December 31, 2018, 9 months after the deadline?
It's the same. It's the issue we were just talking about. It's the same issue.
Okay. I'll yield to my colleagues and come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, administration.
Morning.
Right. On page 2 of your testimony, you state, and I quote, that they would thank you, that work with the Mayor's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the Managing Director's Office, the Department of Commerce to promote, I quote, equitable practices and inclusive policies throughout the city's grant seeking and grant management practices. So speak, if you will, to what those new equitable practices may be and inclusive policies that will guide the grant seeking and grant management process in this new year.
I'm going to ask Ashley Del Bianco, our Chief Grants Officer, to talk you through that.
Okay.
Good morning, Ashley Del Bianco, Chief Grants Officer for the city.
What is your name again?
Ashley Del Bianco.
Okay. How long have you been with the city?
8 years,
And how long in this capacity?
4 years.
Okay. All right then. Okay. If you could please speak to what types of, quote, equitable practices and inclusive policies will be used to guide the grant seeking and grant management process, and how does this differ from where the administration was 4 years ago?
I'll answer that in 2 categories. So we have 2 types of grants that we pursue. One type is competitive grants that are discretionary dollars that come from the federal government under existing appropriations, but in which administration has the ability to designate particular grant opportunities. And those are competitive. We have to apply against other municipalities or other applicants. In those cases, our ability to respond with equitable and diverse proposals, or including equitable and diverse proposals, is somewhat opportunistic because we're responding to a particular ask of the federal government. And in those cases, we do have a set of policies and procedures to try to look at opportunities to promote inclusion, equity, and diversity as we respond to those opportunities. We also have the opportunity to pursue other grants that are private philanthropic dollars, and in those cases, we often are able to make a case directly to a funder to look for ways to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, as stated in the testimony, there are opportunities that our office, we play a support role to various parts of the administration, various agencies, and what we do is we work with and advise them on how they might be able to do that.
So cite an example where you've been successful in making a case and the person, the funding entity bought your appeal.
Okay. One particular case of a grant initially 2 years ago was the Racial Equity Here opportunity. That was a private funder of philanthropy that was looking for opportunities to support the city government in promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion directly in city practices and policies. That grant opportunity we pursued in coordination with the Mayor's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and other agencies within the city. And through that process, we received funding. We also received technical assistance so that the different agencies were able to offer training and development for staff.
So those dollars were used for training and development?
They were, and also for studies to look at some of the diversity and inclusion policies of the city.
Okay. So is that still in play, or are those dollars over?
That particular opportunity sunsetted, but we have pursued other subsequent opportunities, not just from that funder, but from other funders who are looking to support the ongoing work and implementation.
So as a result of that training, have you seen any difference in the yield of the training?
There have been examples of that. I could get you some more specific details on that, but it certainly has included data analysis on city policies that have then informed how the administration has shaped things. But I could provide some more specific detail.
That would be useful because training for training's sake is empty.
Yes.
We get the funding dollars, but if we don't use the data to indeed implement new practices, then it's just been a waste of your time and that funder's money.
Yes, we have grant reports that I can provide to your office.
That would be terrific. How soon can the president get that?
As soon as possible.
So is that today? Is that the end of the week?
I will go back today and find those grant reports.
Okay. Are there goals associated with this new focus on diversity and inclusion with respect to grants?
With respect to grants, in terms of how many grants we apply for that have diversity, equity, and inclusion goals?
Yes.
There is not a specific number, but it is a priority for us. We do seek opportunities, and we also try to, as I said, in those opportunistic situations where we're applying to a specific request for proposal, we try to build some of those practices and themes into the work.
And lastly, with the federal grants, I don't want to misstate or misquote what I think I heard, and that is that with regards to federal grants, they ask you to provide data or information on diversity and inclusion, or no?
On some occasions, yes. It
I
really
see.
depends on the particular grant opportunity.
I see.
And the agency that we're applying to.
So you've been there for 4 years.
Yes.
Where do you see a change, a difference of where your department was when you got there and where you are now 48 months later?
Specifically related
Specifically to diversity and inclusion with regards to grants.
in terms of, I can't say that it's a metric that we are specifically able to track in a straight line because we're trying to be responsive and respond to the particular opportunities.
As they had come to you?
Yes, but if I can provide some more information, I'll try to do so.
Our 5 minutes not up yet? Okay, I'll wait for the next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning.
Morning.
This issue that I'm about to inquire about has already come up in some of our hearings this year, but I really want to drill down on it and to really get some answers on the record. You all know that my office has inquired about the use of city capital dollars on school district property. And for example, we constantly hear, the public and many others talk about the city being, much more innovative in trying to use city dollars to leverage private investment and or charitable investment in our works. And in my district, for example, the Lindy Family Charitable Foundation has created a very smart, impactful, and a transformative way to make over our schoolyards. And many of them, if you drive through and you look at them or walk them the way I do, it's just an asphalt hardscape. It's just usually blacktop and or concrete with nothing there. Their program is called Fiesta Playgrounds, and it is beginning to be rolled out citywide. So they're just not making this investment in schools in the 9th Councilmatic District, but through their data, okay, looks like Councilman Jones may be a beneficiary too, right, across the city of Philadelphia. However, they could expand more quickly and have an even bigger impact if we could supplement their foundation funding with city capital dollars. Yet your office has told us, no, we cannot use city capital dollars on school district property. And just for me on the record, can you explain why that is the case, especially now that we have local control? Now, I understood, I think earlier, Council President Clark had asked a question about, does it make sense to combine the borrowing power of the city and the school district given local control? So while my question is not exactly the same, because we have local control now, tell me why we wouldn't or shouldn't be able to use our city capital dollars in this instance to match it with this foundation funding.
So I think it depends on the usage. I think there are cases where you can use city money for school district facilities if you show that there's a public purpose and that the facility will be available. So it's probably worth our talking about it in more depth to understand the situation.
Okay, all right, we will make sure that we do that, and for the record, the public does use it, especially on the weekends, right? Our kids are in there and they're playing basketball and so forth. So we'll definitely follow up with you. This next question is somewhat related to my question about using the capital dollars on school district property. Help me to understand why we cannot use capital dollars for maintenance on items that we originally used capital dollars to purchase. So, for example, cameras and trash cans on our commercial quarters. I'm just trying to understand why we can't use capital dollars because we're trying to maintain our investment. Yeah. So how can we do that?
So you can use operating dollars on maintenance, but for capital dollars, you really want the investment to last at least 5 years and to be at least, I think it's $15,000. So for items that don't meet that criteria, you would want to use operating dollars.
So, for example, the first quarter that I ever worked on when I was elected, the first one was the Wadsworth Avenue commercial quarter. And every time I think about that length of years, the banners that we secured in 2005, right, are still standing strong, and some of the other streetscape improvements we made, so they have long outlived the 5-year, sort of 10-year requirements. And so much like we'll follow up on the issue relative to the schoolyards, I would like to sit down and figure out a way to hammer out a compromise on this issue.
Right, and it may just be that in the end it's best to fund it out of operating. So I'm not saying that we can't fund them, it's just a matter of finding the right source.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Real quick, the assessments became public yesterday, OPL. Assuming that those assessments continue as proposed, what will be the impact on the 5-year plan?
So not much at all. They're basically around what we had projected. We projected 3% growth.
Similar to what?
Yeah, they're a little higher, but after the appeal process, they may be the same. So really no impact on the 5-year plan.
So we don't anticipate any real. Okay. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President.
You're welcome.
Good morning, how are you?
Morning.
The requested amount for this year, not next year, that was $68 million. Is that correct?
Sorry, for what?
For the current year that we are in, not for the new year coming up, the new fiscal year, but it was $68 million. Roughly, I'm not saying to the penny, but 68 million?
I'm not sorry. You're talking about the finance department budget?
Yes, the finance budget.
Finance budget for FY
2018.
18.
Yes.
Okay, so let me get to the right page. So there's I think the amount was lower than that, but let me find the appropriate page. So the page you want to look at, sorry.
I could do it another way if it makes it easier.
Now, if you look at page 8, really you want to take out, for 18, there's that 44 million, but 30 million of that is payment to other funds. And there's about 4.3 million that's contributions, indemnities, and taxes, which is really going to other places.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. You are correct. I said 18, I meant 19. So yeah, but
Okay.
starting with 18, the budget amount was 14,151,000 roughly, and then the actual amount was 44 million. But 30 million was for what?
That 30 million is payment to other funds, which no, that's this year's. So it was payments to capital. It moves over to capital.
So money was transferred to the finance department, and from there, it went to
For capital projects.
for capital projects. Okay.
And yeah.
Then in 19, it was 68 million was the budgeted amount, but 98 million was the actual amount.
And I see original appropriations of 78 on page 8, right? And the big difference there is the $20 million in class 800, and that's the payment to the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund.
So I see that in general, since 2009, the finance department spends about 33% more than of the budget than it requests. On average, 33% more. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. What I'm trying to understand is that is that part of like a common practice that money is moved to the finance department to then pay for other things?
Yes. So throughout this budget, there are most of the payments that show in this budget are not for the operations of the Office of the Director of Finance.
Right.
So they're for benefits, they're for payments to the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund, they're for transfers over to capital. So they're for kind of a hodgepodge of things, but they're all showing up here.
Okay. So the budget that I kind of must deal with every year is always challenging because it seems to me, at least from my perspective, that it's not a very detailed budget, that money is put into certain places, which it appears based on past history, that there's no intention to actually spend it where it's being listed, and it will be transferred out later for its actual purpose. My problem with that, just speaking for myself, is how do I vote for a budget where I look at numbers, I don't know what they're for, they may be for something good, maybe there's something better. How do I vote for a budget where I don't believe that the money listed under a category is actually going to be spent within that category? I'm not saying you have an answer for that. I'm just saying, like, I'm challenged with that.
So a couple of things. One, on the detail for the kind of direct expenditures in finance, there are more than 50 pages that lay out the positions they'll go for, the contracts they'll go for. The things you're seeing that come in later, like the payment to capital, always come back to council. They're always transferred. So it's not like if there are additional funds we want to spend them that we don't come back to council. So there is transparency about all of it. So the items that you're saying are new are items that will happen if budget performance is better than we anticipated, but we always come back to council with those.
So if there is a department, and I've put up charts before where over the last 9 years, it typically gets, let's say, $1 million, and without any additional people, materials, resources, the budgeted amount is $12 million. I'm going to look at $11 million with great suspicion. I don't know what it's for, but what I'm saying is, even though you come back with a transfer ordinance, I don't know that money isn't better left in the pockets of the taxpayers. And therefore, for me, particularly as we have discussed earlier, I don't think that the budgeted amount based on these unreliable tax assessments, that this money should be collected by the city. It should be returned or credited, and therefore, what I really like to know is what is this money, all this money, intended to be used for that I'm not being told what it's for?
So it's intended to be used the way it's shown in the budget. We do, though, want departments to manage their budgets, and we'd rather that they come in slightly below rather than above. If they come in slightly below, then our budget performance is better than the initial budget, and then we would come back and ask to move it. But there's no guarantee that they will come in below when we build the budgets based on what departments say they need.
Thank you very much, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman McGinn.
Good morning, I think, still.
Good morning.
So could you talk a little bit, I think we talked a little bit about this with the 5-year plan, but some of the impacts that recent things that have moved for around property taxes, how it relates to the stability of the school district finances?
Right. So there have been a couple of pieces of legislation designed to help property owners with the impact of the increase in assessments. So there's a trade-off to that. I mean, there are obviously reasons you want to help people with their bills. When you do that, it then has an impact on the school district, either in the district having less revenue or having a delay in getting that revenue.
Yeah, so I'm aware that these things have an impact on the district. Have you calculated what the impact will be over the course of 5 years? And whether there need to be any adjustments made with the city's, with any other city funding?
So we did those calculations, I think, at the time the bills were heard and testified to them, so we can get that information back to you. But we also knew about those before we made this budget proposal. So, in terms of what we thought the appropriate amounts were to give to the district, the impact of those bills was already included.
Okay, wait, so do you think that is there any significant adjustment, in your opinion, for the school district's 5-year finances moving forward in order to assure us of the stability that City Council worked so hard for in last year's budget?
Yeah, I think the district made those adjustments in the plan that was presented to the school board last week. So I think they accounted for that.
In the lump sum budget?
Yes, and in their 5-year plan projections.
And are there things out of there that you would like to share? Because I don't know that many of our council colleagues here today have paid, we haven't gotten a briefing on the lump sum budget, for example, from the school district directly. So is there anything that you think we ought to know right now that came out of the lump sum budget presentation at the school district last week that we ought to know?
Yeah, so the lump sum showed balanced budgets through FY through 21, starts to go negative in 22, and then has substantial deficits by the end. And I think the way the district framed that was to say that they really wanted to get 2 years of balance and have a plan that framed the conversation for their funders about, how we need to approach getting them to balance and ensuring that the investments they make can continue. And I think that's a conversation that we have to have with the state and kind of look at what happens with the state over the next couple of years.
Okay. So I know that the meetings between you and the school district and the parking authority have become more frequent and more data and information is being shared. I'm curious about what your strategy is to continue to increase their contributions. Obviously, as you know, when I came in 2016, they were projected to be at their lowest. It was something like $3 million under former Director Vince Fenerty. They're now at the highest point, but that's that's obviously separate from the fact of what their actual revenues have been. So do you have a sense of what your strategy is to improve or maximize the parking authority's contribution to the school system?
Yeah, and I think it's really a matter of working with them and the district to make sure that we're all focused on that, and that's kind of one of their goals, is to make sure that they run their finances in a way that maximizes that number.
Do you think that do you have confidence that they know how to run their finances?
I think that they have put a real focus on this, and I think the results have actually been somewhat positive in terms of that number being higher than it was originally projected to be.
So as a near $250 million entity that takes, takes in money for folks and is meant to be a public trust, again, they should have a focus on it. Do you have confidence that they understand what their financial responsibility, what their financial projections are, and how they plan to improve their finances to the public trust?
I do think they understand that.
Okay, and do you have confidence in them to continue on the way they are?
I think so long as we kind of keep working with them and are able to...
Do you have oversight over their budget?
No.
Would you like oversight over their budget? Do you think they could benefit from that?
Yes, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to questions from before. And on the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, can that be completed without the schedule of financial assistance to CFA?
Yes, they're two separate documents.
Can't be completed without it.
Yes.
But doesn't the CAFR contain vital information that comes from the CFA?
So they are interrelated, but the CAFR gets finished, audited before the CFA is finished.
And then the fiscal year 18 CFA hasn't been completed either. Is there any reason why?
And it's the same issue, and we're working to make sure that it comes out earlier than this year's did.
And is there a target date for the completion of that CFA?
I want to get back to you on that because I had a date in my mind, but I want to make sure that it's right.
And then did we put any corrective action plan in place for future to try to meet the federal requirements for next fiscal year for the CFA and the CAFR to make sure that we're...
Yeah, so Kat has been working with the controller's office on putting that together.
So, when I looked over the CAFR on page 163, it says single audit, the paragraph 3, it talks about that, I'm just going to read this one sentence. In the opinion of city officials, the only significant contingent liabilities related to matters of compliance are the timely filing of the city's audit report, data collection form, and reporting package detailed below, and unresolved and unquestioned costs in the city's schedule of financial assistance to be issued for the year ended June 30th, which accounted for $519.3 million for all open programs as of November 30th, 2018. Of this amount, of the $519 million, $427 million represents unresolved costs due to the inability to obtain audit reports from subrecipients for the year ended June 30th, 2018. The remaining $92 million is city-funded general fund grants. So that $427 million, that's what we're talking about, that is not audited?
No, everything, sorry, read that again. It's not.
It says, of this amount, $427.2 million represents unresolved costs due to the inability to obtain audit reports from subrecipients for the year ended June 30th, 2018. This is page 163 in the CAFR.
Yeah, no, that's a separate issue on subrecipients, but that I think is also being resolved.
So tell me what that is, Rob. What does that mean?
I need to get back to you with more detail on that one.
Okay. It just sounds like a lot of money not resolved.
Yeah, but yeah.
Is the city controller's office in compliance with the single audit requirement?
Well, it's kind of both of us together. It's the same issue that you're asking about.
And another question, why is the Health Choices Behavioral Health Fund audited by an independent auditor?
I'm not sure.
Is that about, you know how big that fund is?
Yeah, that's a big, I mean, that's...
Like $1 billion or so?
Right, yeah.
And we have a separate auditor for that. And do you think the city should have a cash management policy?
The city does have a cash management
do?
policy, yes.
So can you share that with us?
Yes.
Okay. In our current fund accounting structure, how many funds actually does the city have at this point? And do they match the bank accounts on the treasurer's side?
It's listed, and if you have the CAFR, they're all listed in there, and we can get you the list. There are, our cash accounts aren't lined up with just funds. Some funds can be commingled and others aren't, so no, they don't match up.
Okay. The Community Development Fund shows a $20 million appropriation that, according to the fiscal year 19 estimates that we've been provided, hasn't been spent.
That's like that $200 million. It's a contingency for if funds come in.
But there's another $20 million appropriation for this year.
That's right. In case, it's the same issue. In case grants come in during the year, we want to have that
So is that
appropriation.
40 million or 20 million not spent?
No, so the 19 appropriation would lapse, right? And so it's a new appropriation.
Just carried over?
It's new.
New.
It lapses, it goes away.
So if we don't use it, we lose
Correct,
it?
on the operating side, if you don't use it.
So we lost that 20 million?
We didn't receive anything. We never got it.
But we could have received it?
It's a contingency in case we receive something.
Okay.
But if we don't receive it, it's not like we had money that we lost.
In fiscal year 19, the budget appropriated $250 million in grants funds, but was never obligated. I'm just curious as to why, and why wasn't this grant awarded?
So that, again, is what we talked about earlier. Those are contingencies in case grants come in.
Okay. Let me just ask you the overall question that still concerns me. I've asked it before, so I'm like repetitive. Budget's gone up 21% in 4 years. Deep poverty's gone up 12 to 14% in the last 4 years. I think we went, according to your information, from 186,000 to about 215,000 people in deep poverty. What are we forecasting for deep poverty over the next 4 years?
So I don't have specific projections for deep poverty, but I will tell you that you're linking two things that are important to link, because one of the reasons that our expenditures are going up is we're making investments in things that will help with deep poverty. And because deep poverty is something that developed over decades, it's not going to go away in 1 year. But we're investing in schools, we're investing in pre-K, we're investing in things to tackle the opioid crisis. There are a number of investments in here that are all designed to tackle that in the long term. And it's like when we talk about pensions, it's not something that you deal with in 1 year. So to look at deep poverty in 2 years and say, well, it's gone up, so these investments aren't working, I don't think that's the way it works. I think you have to take a longer term view.
Right. And I'm all for the education and the rebuild. I have no issues. I'm supportive. But I think we need to do more for the people that are like age 20 or 19 that don't have jobs, up to age 50 or 55 that are unemployed and aren't trained for this economy. I think there's several legs of poverty, and I think that's a big leg that we're really not addressing as aggressively as we can. I know that my colleague, Councilman Parker, has the Power Up program, but we need to do way more on that stuff than what we're doing.
And one of the investments we have is in workforce development, and I think that gets at what you're talking about. But Power Up is a great program that definitely helps with the issue.
I guess what I'd like to see in my last question, I'll be done, is that tackle this in a big way. If we wanted to get 50,000 people off the books of being in poverty, what do we have to do? What are those strategies and tactics to aggressively go after cutting the poverty by 50,000 in the next 4 years? I'd be willing to work whatever time it takes to work on that, but we need a plan of action to accomplish that goal.
Right, and I think that's what you see throughout the plan. I mean, this plan is really dedicated to looking at those issues.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
Yes, good afternoon. I want to punctuate Councilman Dom's point about what more we can do and should do with those on the opposite end of the continuum. And so I need, while we know Power Up matters, is making a difference, is the idea proposed by Councilman Dom a part of the continuing discussions that the administration is having as we tackle this elephant called deep poverty?
Yeah, it's always our focus. So we're always talking about ways to get at poverty and deep poverty. So
No,
yes.
I'm not questioning that. Don't misunderstand me. I'm talking specifically about those citizens on the opposite end of the continuum whom too often we don't make a part of our strategic thinking.
Yes, they are a part of our thinking.
I would say, so cite examples, and separate from Power Up, where the mission is achieved in a 2,000% way. Power Up, and what else might the administration be
Right.
thinking?
So if you look at something like funding for pre-K, right? So that helps kids get a head start on their education, prepares them better for school.
Rob DeBoe,
It also,
we're clear about the front end of the continuum, because we know if we're going to pay for it one way or the other. We're going to pay for it on the front end, or we're going to pay for it on the back end. So for those young people that we miss on the front end, who end up being handicapped, disenfranchised on the back end, 18 to 24, what are we doing for that contingency of young people?
Right, so you're talking about people who are past the school age.
Yes.
Got it. So that's where we have investments in things like workforce development to help people prepare for jobs. But I'm probably not the best person to give you all the details of that, so we should probably get back to you with details.
So
But-
who in administration would be better suited to address those questions?
So it's probably, on the workforce development, it's probably Sheila Ireland.
Sheila Ireland?
Yeah, that's her area.
Okay.
But we can definitely get you something on that.
Please?
Yep.
When?
I would want to check with her before I commit to her timeline, but we will get something
Is
as
she a
quickly
part
as
of
we
the
can.
administration?
She is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Where is she, in Commerce?
Yes, I think that's right. Yes, she's in commerce.
Okay, please remember to do that, because
Yes.
this notion of creating, or at least focusing on young people 18 to 21, sometimes 18 to 30, 18 to 50. I'm curious to know how the administration is tackling those individuals, because, you know, if they contribute to the tax base, then we move that needle.
Understood.
Okay. Page 9 of your testimony, quote, "To mitigate against the risk of future state and federal funding cuts, the plan includes an annual federal funding reserve of about $55 million. While this reserve would help offset potential cuts, it represents only a small fraction of what the city projects receive in grants from the state and the feds. So how has the reserve for federal and state funding grants funding cuts grown in the past 5 years? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so that reserve level has been fairly stable over the years.
okay.
Yeah, it hasn't moved much.
You say fairly stable.
I think it may have been in the low 50s, and now it's 55.
Okay, all right. Where have we seen more cuts, at the state level or at the federal level? I'm just curious, because knowing how that impacts.
I think over time we've seen more at the federal level.
Okay, I wonder why. Okay. Let me go back to my sticking point on diversity and inclusion. And so I'm unclear on where the thread happens with regards to the grant seeking and grant management piece and the impact that those grants are having on the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and the Department of Commerce. So when the Department of Commerce comes before us, I will look to see some thread that connects the work of the grants office and the work of the Department of Commerce, because that's completely went over my head with regards to the answers yielded by the professional who spoke about that. Where's the thread that connects the grant seeking and grant management to the Department of Commerce?
In many cases, the Department of Commerce is an applicant for grants, so officially the grants office ourselves, we are not the applicant. We consult and support a city agency or office in applying.
Okay.
Could you clarify perhaps your question about the thread?
My curiosity is, you receive the dollars, but where is the work of those dollars manifested in the Department of Commerce? I'm missing it.
There may be specific grants that are for specific projects related to work that the Department of Commerce plans to implement. And in the cases where specific dollars are won under a grant, we've proposed the city has proposed a scope of work and must fulfill that scope of work in order to receive and use those dollars.
So where is the diversity and inclusion factor in what you just described?
If there are diversity and inclusion factors written into or proposed as part of the grant, then they would be required as part of the scope of work.
Okay, all right then. Thank you. That clarifies that. That completes my questioning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to follow up on the issue that was raised a little earlier regarding the city's credit rating. And I just want to also just note, I remember there was a time when the city of Philadelphia was in no way, shape, or form prepared for a black swan effect of any kind. And so, one, we thank the administration for placing a very strong focus on how we would function, particularly in the case of any federal crisis that could potentially come our way in the next few years. But I wanted to just note for the record that almost exactly a year ago, I think it was March 23rd, 2018, S&P cut its credit rating on Philadelphia's general obligation bonds to A from A+, and it cited concerns about our pension liability, uncertainty about revenue support for the school district, and then those potential federal policy changes. However, on a positive note, in November 2018, Moody's upgraded its outlook on the city's general obligation credit from negative to stable. Very specifically, can you tell us what does this mean for our borrowing costs, and specifically, how is it going to impact our operating budget and that debt service line item in particular?
Yeah, so often your bonds trade on your weakest rating.
The weakest rating.
Yeah, so if the weakest rating changes, then it has more of an impact. That being said, it's always a good thing when something like a negative watch comes off. It's, it makes it easier to tell the story of your bonds. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing. It helps reduce our costs in the long term.
In the long term. So while we were excited about Moody's upgrade, it ultimately doesn't usurp all of the...
Right, but when a rating agency puts you on negative watch,
yeah,
two things can happen. One, they can say, okay, things have gotten better, we're taking you off, or they can downgrade you, and that would have been a real hit, and then our costs would have gone up. So it's very good that it went that way.
In addition to that, and I know we're going to talk about it, go back, if you will, to give me the explanation about the need to maintain the fund balance compared to the rainy day fund. And I'll tell you why. We've had legislation proffered, in this body, and I've had to communicate recently, this past Saturday at a budget briefing and town hall meeting with members of the public, sort of not really, or I'm not going to say not grasping, I just think some things have been miscommunicated that weren't accurate about, with all of the challenges that the city faces in a number of areas, why is there a need to maintain such a healthy fund balance and the rainy day sort of fund? I mean, and just explain that for the record, please.
Right. So the Government Finance Officers Association, which is kind of the leading authority on local government finances, thinks you should have a fund balance that's equal to 2 months of expenditures, so almost about 17%. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of jurisdictions that get up there. We decided that for us, that's not realistic because of all the needs we have, and that if we tried to get to a balance that high, we'd be making other sacrifices. So we set a policy internally of being between 6 and 8%.
6 and 8.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we try to get. Last year we were actually end of the year at 8.1%. Mm-hmm. So we got there. There's a difference, asked by the difference between a budget stabilization reserve fund and our fund balance. The budget stabilization, the reserve fund, has certain restrictions on when money can come out, so it's not as flexible. Fund balance is more flexible. So when you look at the trade-off between the two, you want to keep in mind how much flexibility you want to have. Mm-hmm. And so that's why you need to make sure there's a healthy amount in your fund balance and that there's some in the rainy day fund.
Because you have had such a long history, and I say this in as complimentary a manner as possible. You've been here through multiple administrations, Rob, and your institutional knowledge about the city's finances is very well respected across the board. What is your response to a person who says, we have a rainy day right now, and they start talking about all of the issues that are facing the city, and why shouldn't we be spending those dollars in other areas right now? Right. And I really want you to reflect back on when you worked in different administrations that did not have or didn't, have dollars in the rainy day fund.
So I think the best example, which I think is where you're trying to lead me, is during the Great Recession. Right. So we actually had a fund balance then of over $200 million. But when that downturn hit, immediately hit our revenues. It eventually hit our pension contribution because of what happened with earnings. So our fund balances went negative. We got to the point where we were worried that we couldn't even run out of cash. So we had to make dramatic cuts. That's really what you're trying to protect against with your rainy day fund, is having to make those dramatic cuts when the economy goes south and goes south more quickly than you anticipated.
Thank you. Thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Ginn?
Thank you. So I'm interested in in the area of risk management, and notice that there's been a significant increase in settlements that were projected for fiscal year 2019, and then to maintain it, it's almost a 50% increase. And these are, I assume, settlements related to civil actions brought forth against the city.
You talking about indemnities? Which,
Risk management.
yeah,
under
but there are a number of things that
It
you're looking.
says settlement costs for closed claims,
Got it. Okay.
a 50% increase from 2018 actual to 2019 target.
Yeah.
So one, can you provide a list of settlements over 15,000 in the last year categorized by department?
Yep. Yes.
And then two, is there a reason that you're projecting such a significant increase in the settlement costs? And are you looking at these claims by category, and is there something that we can do, or are you providing recommendations to either city departments or more broadly, so that we can reduce the city's exposure to liability?
I'm going to ask our risk manager to address that.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Barry Scott, Deputy Director of Finance for Risk Management. Yes, Councilwoman, Risk works with departments to address issues which are repetitive in order to try to control those costs. Our Safety and Loss Prevention Unit looks and works with our claims unit in order to try to resolve these issues as much as possible. So it is something that we are looking at.
So is there a reason you're projecting a 50% increase in settlement costs for actions against for settlements related to civil actions against the city?
So we've changed a little bit how we are approaching some of these matters, and what we're able to do in a number of cases is to resolve these matters before they become litigated. Risk only handles pre-litigation claims, and so and what we're trying to do now is target matters which we believe it's best to resolve the claim before it goes into litigation. And so we have been picking up some matters which would otherwise have gone to litigation, because what we find is that, and sorry I don't have the numbers, but that in fact those matters which go to litigation are settle or resolve at a much higher value. And so when we can resolve them in risk, we can save the city substantial dollars over the ultimate costs if they were resolved as litigated matters.
I think it goes back to the request earlier then, that it would help to understand like whether you're categorizing, whether these claims are being categorized in any way, like what areas that they're happening, and whether there's a concurrent level of discussion or dialogue within particular departments, so that we can avoid settlement or litigation would be the most ideal situation. I think we can both agree.
Absolutely, and we can look at that and get that something for you.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask a little bit about CAMA and its unrolling. Also a little bit about One Philly. I know the rollout of One Philly has not been all that smooth. So as we look at One Philly's rollout and then we're thinking about CAMA, what are you seeing as things that we as a city ought to be under consideration so we're not caught off guard by, say, overtime costs or, can be helpful in terms of the rollout period?
So they're actually kind of very different projects.
Yeah,
So
I understand.
One Philly was about payroll and benefits, and CAMA is about the assessment process. But I do think there have been lessons from One Philly about making sure, that we communicate early and often, we communicate effectively, that we do the change management thoroughly throughout the process. And I think that will translate to all of our projects.
Can you talk a little bit about CAMA? We assume that it's on track, and can you talk a little bit about what you think it can ideally achieve and what we can see both in the finances but also in sort of engagement or projections going forward? Yeah,
so CAMA is still on track, still on the same schedule, start to go live in about a year. Okay. And it will make the
So January 2020 or
Yes.
July 2020? Yeah. Okay.
January. It will make the assessment process much smoother. It will make the communication between the various agencies involved much smoother. It'll make the process more efficient. It'll make it much easier for us to do the kind of reporting that everybody, including us, wants us to be able to do. So there are a number of benefits from CAMA.
Okay. I think that's it for right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Excuse me. Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you mentioned that the $220 million in grants revenue funds is for grants that the city might or might not receive.
Right.
But it looks like in fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19, there were no obligations associated with the grants revenue advances. However, in the mid-year appropriations for fiscal year 18, we took $94 million from grants revenue and distributed to departments mostly for unbudgeted payroll expenses. And in fiscal year 19, we appropriated $127 million from grants revenue, again, mostly for unbudgeted payroll expenses. Were these appropriations associated with the grants that we received?
No, those appropriations in those cases were mostly related to collective bargaining agreements and really wound up coming out of our fund balance. Was kind of the net impact of those.
So the $94 million in 18 and the $127 million in 19 were from the labor negotiations?
Well, you talked about the Class 100 portion of it. Yes, that's primarily what they were for.
Okay, and the other piece I wanted to just bring up, I know that Councilwoman Parker was a big proponent, and I want to mention this Power Up program again. We had a hearing on it a while ago where...
Sorry, the what?
Power Up,
yeah.
Community college. And we had a hearing that said that the program is going to produce for the city like a 13% return in our investment per year for the next 10 years. And we're investing $800,000. This is to help people, I guess, advance their business and open business. Why wouldn't we dramatically increase that program, considering its return and considering the need of especially people that are, 18 to 50 who need this opportunity?
I'm assuming it's probably a capacity issue, but we can look into it.
I mean, because there's an avenue where we can maybe do better and dramatically change people's lives. The other piece I don't want the administration to lose sight of is that we have the highest poverty, some of the highest taxes, and the lowest entrepreneurship rates of the top 20 cities. And when you look at the breakdown of businesses owned in the city, 78.6% are owned by white people, 10% are owned by Asian, and 2.4% are African American. So my question is, what are we doing to create entrepreneurship programs like Power Up and others, but how do we dramatically change that equation? Because 41% of our population is African American, and yet 2.4% of the businesses are owned by African Americans. How do we teach people about entrepreneurship? You know, this body put in a resolution asking the state to provide mandatory entrepreneurship courses, 7th to 12th grade in high school. We'll see what the state does with that. But what else can we do to advance that cause?
Probably a better question for Commerce.
Commerce? Okay. After I said all that, you can send me Commerce. Okay. One other question on the credit rating. I want to compliment the Finance Department because I noticed that our interest payments actually went down, if I'm correct, in 4 years, from $795 million down to $656 million. That's positive. We dropped our interest payments $139 million. I'm assuming it's because maybe we managed our portfolio better and refinanced and have some lower rates.
Yep, that is definitely part of it.
Because the flip side is, 4 years ago, we had $7.25 billion of debt, and now we have $8.6 billion of debt. So we've increased our debt almost 20%, but we've dropped our payments dramatically. Is that pretty accurate?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I'm sure.
And so over the next 4 years, are we anticipating to continue to increase the debt load?
So there are, and this is kind of the age-old trade-off we have, right? We have an old infrastructure that needs investment. So, you'll see in the capital program, for example, one of the things we have in there is $200 million for paving, which I think everyone agrees is desperately needed. So there will be debt associated with that. And there's debt associated with the rebuild program. So there will continue to be borrowings over time because there are infrastructure needs.
All these increases, though, we're seeing in the budget of 21%, the debt load of 20%, even though the interest rates went down, don't you think against an inflation backdrop of the same period of 5.25%, it puts an undue burden on those who can least afford it?
So I think that a great deal of those expenditures are dedicated to the people you're talking about. If you look at the programs that we're implementing, that's what they're dedicated to handle.
Okay. I think I'm done with my questions for today. Okay. Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. All right, we have no further questions here, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time here today.